Thanks for checking out this video. If you work in sports, either as an S&C, physiologist, performance analyst or something else, then here are some tips and tricks that could be useful for you to know. I've covered each of these tips and tricks in much more detail in other places, so this won't be a comprehensive video, but it'll be a good introduction to what I believe are 10 essential skills if you're going to be working with Excel in the field of sports. What I've got on this opening screen here is some other useful links for you. So up on the right hand side at the top there's some resources and links. The top ones are relating to sports science and sports performance. So my channel is called Excel Tricks for Sports. Mladen Jovanovic has got a whole bunch of Excel stuff as well as other content on his site, Complementary Training. And a newcomer, Adam Sullivan, is doing some amazing work as well using both Excel and Google Docs around training load and things like that. So you might want to check out those three links. If you're a student of Excel and you want to go a little bit further, then the next 5 links are general rather than being about sport. Excel is fun, has about 3,000 videos, and if you watch enough of them, you'll see that I have copied a lot of his tricks and applied them to sport. He is the master of explaining complex things in Excel. Power BI is a separate little offshoot that's related to Excel, and it allows you to do some pretty advanced high-level analytics, and it is free as part of the Microsoft suite, so Power BI is worth checking out. Chandu and Goodly are both blogs / websites where they have all sorts of Excel related content, and something good about those two sites is that they are very visually pleasing, so there are some really nice looking spreadsheets. So I'm not an expert in making my files look good. These two guys are. They use really good color palettes and make your files look really nice. So for that reason alone, it's worth checking out. If you want to really get in amongst Excel, you want to learn some VBA, then easily the best VBA channel on YouTube is called Wiseowl VBA. It's all free, and there are at least 100 VBA videos that will teach you everything you need to know. Below that, if you like some of the content, I've got 4 different courses that I've created. One is really a much more drawn out version of this video. It is a whole bunch of fundamental concepts for S&Cs. All the examples are relating to S&C. Then there's 2 specific projects. One is around creating a strength template, another one around an athlete monitoring system. And finally, I partnered up with Rob Carroll from the Video Analyst, and we produced a Excel Performance Analyst video series as well, and you'll find that over on his site. As far as my own study goes, what I believe is the best course out there is on my online training hub. It's a little bit advanced. It's around things like Power BI and advanced applications of Excel. But if you are looking for something to do, then check that out. There is a website. I think it's just under my logo here. I'll just drag that down. Yep, I was right. Udemy is a site that has courses for as little as $10 around things like Excel pivot tables and so on. Anyway, that's enough of that intro. On the left hand side you'll see my 10 top tips, and each of those has a tab. These are hyperlinks, so if I click on the first one, it'll take us to the tab called Navigation, and we can get straight into it. If you're new to Excel, then you want to spend a bit of time getting used to things such as the ribbon up the top. If you click on the headings, you can see that there are categorized options there with buttons you can just click, and we'll check out a bunch of these as we go through it. But I'm going to go back to the Home tab and just follow this group of topics on the left hand side in the black area. So if you're anywhere in your spreadsheet and you hit Control Home, it'll take you to cell A1. How do you know you're in cell A1? Well, you can see that the little address box up the top here, also called the name box, tells us, and if you click anywhere else it'll tell you the address. Control Home is always good to use if you've got 1,000 rows or 1,000 columns in your spreadsheet. It's a quick way to get home. If you are selecting lots of cells because you want to apply a format, then the easiest way to do that is to click on the first cell, hold Shift down, click on the final cell, and Excel will select everything in between those two clicks. And so if I wanted to, I could make that italic, for example. If you don't want to do every single cell in that range, you can hold down the Control key. So if I wanted to select that, you can see that they're all non-contiguous cells, but they've all been selected, and if I wanted to, I could make them yellow as an example. I use the keyboard shortcuts Control arrow or Control Shift arrow all the time. So I am in cell F6 at the moment at the top of the date column. If I use Control down arrow, it takes me down as far as the data goes. My last data point is in F34, so it stops there. If I now do Control right arrow, it takes me as far to the right as there is data, which is K34. Control up arrow takes me to K6, Control left arrow takes me back to date. So those keys are really useful, and I do really use them a lot. If I held Shift down as well, it would not only go there, but it would select it. So Control Shift down arrow selects everything. If I do now to the right, it'll select the whole table. So when I'm writing formula, I can click in the first cell of a range and then use the keyboard shortcut Control Shift down arrow, and it'll go to the bottom of the range for me and just help me write that formula quickly without scrolling a long time. Another thing that is useful to know is Control star, which is actually Control Shift 8. That selects everything in the active range, as you can see there. I have some data over here. Do that again, Control Shift 8. It doesn't select that. The reason it doesn't select that or the text above is because there's a blank row, blank column around the outside of my table. Now there's a good lesson in that. That's how you want to set up your tables. Don't have anything immediately next to it. That way you can do things like tables, pivot tables, using keyboard shortcuts like Control asterisk really effectively. If you've got things all jammed together without any blank rows or columns between tables, then Excel doesn't quite know what you're trying to select, so it has to guess. And the best thing you can do is make it easy for Excel. If I wanted to select the whole sheet, I could do two things. With the keyboard, type Control A. As you can see, it's selected everything on screen. Or there's a little triangle above the 1 and to the left of A. If I click on that, we have the same impact. Usually why I do that is to copy a whole sheet to another workbook or to another sheet or something like that. If I want to select a row, select in the margin and click on the 20, or click on the letter K and it selects that whole column. I've talked about a few keyboard shortcuts, but there's also a bunch of mouse shortcuts. So I'm back in the cell that says date, cell F6. If I double click on the bottom margin of that cell, it jumps to the bottom. If I double click on the right margin, it goes all the way to the right, to the top, and so on. If I have a gap in my data, that's where it will stop. And so I always try and avoid having blank rows in my data set, because if you try some of these keyboard or mouse shortcuts, they'll come a cropper because the cursor will stop at that blank cell. Up above this table here, I've got two hyperlinks. Neither of them are from my own videos. They are just directly from YouTube. I know that one of these, I think it's the second one, is over an hour and a half long, so it's a real good rundown of beginner level Excel stuff. So on every tab I've got some of these links. Some of them will be my own, others will be just taken from YouTube. Let's skip across to the next tab. Data entry, something that, like it or not, you'll be spending a lot of time working on. If you are with sports, you'll be putting in workload numbers or session RPEs or something like that as a reasonable part of your day, particularly early in your career. But there are things you can do to make that process easier. Understanding how Excel does data entry is one of those things. So for example, with dates, I've typed this date in, I live in the southern hemisphere and we use day, month, year as our format. So in case you're wondering, as I drag this down, you can see that those dates are incrementing. I didn't do anything to make that happen. It's just that Excel is trying to be clever. It recognizes that it's a date and it increments that down. If that's not what I wanted to do, I could hold the control key down as I drag and it'll stay as the first all the way down. Now it's not always consistent how that behavior works. Sometimes if you're dragging it will increment, other times it won't. The control key is the first thing I would try if you want to see if it behaves differently. So I don't have to have it be every day. I could, for example, say that I want to skip a day. If I select both of those two and drag, it will just continue that pattern. And it gives me this little box option here, and we can choose a few things from that. And it's worth playing around with that if you're doing a lot of data entry. Same thing happens for numbers. If I just drag this down, it's going to stick with 100. But a bit like I showed you with the previous date example, I could write anything I like here, and Excel will continue that increment. Excel has a bunch of custom lists, and so the days of the week is an example of that. I don't even have to type Tuesday, it just is going to guess that for me. And if I drag that down a bit, it'll give me a little pop-up, and I could choose weekdays only, and it's going to take out those weekends. So there's a little bit of smarts built in there. The same concept occurs for January, February, March, April. And also, I'll just delete that and start again. This occurs for the days of the week as well. I don't even have to type the whole lot. It's guessed that that's what I want to do. So it can follow that abbreviation. You can actually create your own custom lists. It might be a list of player names or something else like that that you use regularly. You can create a custom list and that will be available to just drag down. I'm going to demonstrate flash fill with this list of names here. If I just want the first name, Sarah, nothing happens. I type Emma, it's thinking, I'm recognizing a pattern here. Is this what you want to do? If it is, you can simply hit enter and it's all done. So flash fill is new to Excel. It's only in recent versions, but it's incredibly clever. I've been doing some quite complex data cleaning up, and it's been very helpful when you're applying this to 1,000 or more rows. You're not having to go through and write a formula to split it up. You're just having to create a pattern that Excel flash fill can understand. Now, that wasn't my intention to show. I'm just going to delete that out. What I wanted to demonstrate with the auto lists is that if I select all of these names, we have got 22 names here. It'll just repeat those 22 in the same sequence. So as I drag down, I could go down to row 715 and it's just continually repeating that sequence. I'm going to use one of the keyboard shortcuts that we talked about before, Control up arrow, to take me back to the top of the list. So let's say that we made a mistake and it's not Sarah Potter, it's actually Sally Potter. Select the whole lot. Keyboard shortcut Control H is find and replace. So we wanted to change Sarah to Sally. And it's gone and made 33 replacements. So that's pretty easy. Find and replace is definitely something that you want to have a look at. If you are trying to use Excel to write some text and you're trying to format things a certain way, you can use a little trick to allow you to add a new line within the same cell. You can't split cells up. You can certainly insert rows and columns, but you can't split a cell up. So if I go up into cell G1 and I type hello and then do Alt Enter, the cursor goes down to a new line. and I can allow that to give me some specific formatting within Excel that sometimes it's a little bit hard to get. So you don't see any character or feature in the cell. It's just, and if I drag this down, we can see it here. I could do it again if I wanted to. We can have multiple lines within the same cell if we wanted to. I was helping a colleague of mine a few years ago with a project, and as I was trying to give him some help, he did something that, even though I'd used Excel for years, I had never seen. And so working with other people is a great way to discover new tricks that you didn't know existed. So if I click on View, one of the options is New Window. And what that new window does is that it doesn't seem like it's done anything at all, but it has actually opened up a duplicate window of the file we were working on. And now normally I work on two screens, and what's great about it is that I could have one sheet on one tab, the other sheet on another tab, and I could be copying and pasting data really quickly and easily, or simply just referencing information from one sheet to another. Even aware of people who inside a Dropbox file will have two users entering data into the same worksheet, one on one sheet and one on the other. So that new window is something that I think is totally awesome, and I didn't use for years until someone who really wasn't that great at Excel, and he was asking me for help, was using as a regular part of his day. So it just goes to show that sometimes helping people out means that you learn something. If I was trying to create a data set to do some work on, to test out a concept that I had, I might do something like this. Just got that massive list of names. There was quite a lot of rows there, so that'll be a really good column A. And I'll put name. Let's say I wanted to have an example wellness score. And this could be sleep, or it could be anything, but it's a number between 1 and 10. There's a function called ran between, and I type ran between and open the brackets. We'll cover formulas a bit more later on, but all I have to do is input what the bottom value is. In this case it's 1. What the top value is, in this case it's 10. And hit enter. And it has just given us a number 2. And if I double click, what it's done is copy that all the way down to the bottom of our data set, some 700 rows down. Double click again, take me back up. And that information is able to now be chucked into a chart or a pivot table or some kind of calculation. And so I create random data sets all the time using ran between. You can do some quite interesting stuff. For example, if you wanted to do 5 meter time for some speed testing, you could do it this way. You can only do whole numbers with ran between, but you can get around it. So let's say that 5 meter speed time is between 1 second and 1.15 seconds for this population of athletes. So that's not particularly useful for us, 103, but if I divide it by 100, it actually becomes a legitimate speed time that makes a bit more sense. And so in the space of a few clicks I was able to generate 700 sample data sets of 5 meter time, and therefore go off and do some pretend analysis that might be a good test pilot for a project I was running. I'm going to type in a cell and hit enter, and let's see what happens. All those numbers updated because ran between is a volatile function. That means it recalculates every time your spreadsheet changes. And so what you want to do if you're going to use the ran between concept is select them all. I'm going to do it using the menus because it's easy to understand. Copy. And under here there is a bunch of ways you can paste. If you paste values back over the top, that formula is gone and just the number itself is still present. So paste special values is easily one of the most regular tricks, if you call it, that I use. Let's use these names once again. I've got a couple of empty columns, but I'm just going to do one more. Delete that out. If I select column L, just scroll across a little bit so you can see it more easily. If I select column L and I go up to the Data tab, there's a button called Text to Columns, and I can click on it. And you might have seen this in the old days when you tried to open a text file that got spat out of an old software program. Now it's not something that pops up very often, but you can find it like I just did there by clicking on Text to Columns. So if we've got a delimiter, that means that there's a space or a colon or something like that. If I click Next, all I have to do is click that it's a space. You can see the line has already appeared in between those names, and that's all I have to do. Finish. It has suddenly chopped those names up to first name, last name. So text to columns, pretty useful if you've used a GPS system or something like that that spits out its data in one big long text string. I've spent many hours writing complex cleaning formula to do that, but text to columns oftentimes is going to be good enough to figure it out by itself. Last thing I want to show you is really critical if you want to write formulas. It's about cell referencing, so it sounds pretty boring, but it's not. We've got a data set here, and we've got 4 dummy tables underneath. If I click on a cell, if I type the equal sign, that means it's a formula. If I click on a cell, we can see that the formula says equals P7. Now P7 is the address where Roger Hanna currently sits. If I hit enter, everything's great, it just references that cell. But if I drag up, down, left, right, it's going to behave in a certain way. Now I can control that with $signs. I could manually go in, type a $sign in front of the P and a $sign in front of the 7, and that would behave differently now when I drag that up, down, left or right. So that's what we're going to have a look at. Firstly, we're going to have no referencing at all. We're not going to use any $signs. And if I type equals, and I click on that, and I drag it down, I think we've got 5 rows, and I drag it across. What it did is it completely replicated the table above. If we click on one of these cells here, we can see that what it's referencing has shifted. We initially clicked on P7, but now it's referencing something else. That's because when we dragged the formula down, it updated. When we dragged down a row, it updated a row. When we dragged right a row, it updated a row. Let's try and have a look when we just lock the row indicator. So if I click on Roger again, and I put a $sign in front of the 7, and hit enter, we're still looking fine. Drag down, the row has not changed. It's always referencing row 7. If I drag it across, that's okay. It's referencing columns. The column number is updating. It now says T7, but always from the same row. So if we lock the row number will stay the same no matter how much we drag that formula around. Let's try the next one. Click back on the formula. This time I want to lock the column by putting a $sign in front of the P. If I drag that down 4 rows, we can see that we're getting different player names. But if I drag it across, we're not getting any update in columns. And this time, if I click on P7 again, I could either manually type $signs in there, or I could hit the F4 key. The F4 key is a toggle. Press it once, double $signs, press it once more, single, single, none. So it's a 4-way toggle, and I want both row and column locked. And you probably guessed this already, but it's just going to say Roger all of the time. So you certainly want to understand that F4 key and the use of dollar signs if you're writing formula, because you'll have a lot of sleepless nights trying to figure out how to correct things that haven't worked for you. Last thing, it's right on the bottom of this list, formats and conditional formats. If you click in any cell, you could right click on it and there's a little format cells box that appears. You could choose format cells from this right click menu and you'd get a whole bunch of more detailed options, or you can use the keyboard shortcut Control 1. But there's plenty of things you can do. Change the format to text or number or date. You can change alignment. You can wrap cells. You can change fonts just like you would expect to in Word documents. You can put borders around it. You can shade it blue, and you can protect it as well, which means other people can't change it. So that's what formatting cells does. If you are getting a little bit flash with Excel and you want to do conditional formats, that means that Excel will automatically format things for you. So let me show you an example. I've selected down to row 735. On the Home tab, there's a big button here called Conditional Formatting. Now, there's a whole bunch of built-in options. A few of them I just don't like. They're a bit too busy for my liking, but let's have a look at it nonetheless. So we could choose things like this. Highlight anything that's greater than, it's chosen 5.5, my guess is that's the mean, but I want to say 7. It's suggested a option. I can choose a custom one if I want, such as a yellow fill and bold italic font, whatever you like. There are also data bars and things like that that can be useful sometimes, and color scales that can be useful. I just think that this is a little bit too busy and I tend not to use those very often, but conditional formatting is a great option when you've got data entry. It can help you highlight incorrectly entered data. So useful in context of what we've just been talking about. Dates and times is something that I don't think Excel does a great job of, but very important to understand how you can be making your life a little bit easier. Now, the very first concept that you need to understand is that to Excel, a date is just a number. Sometimes if you paste your information, you get what was a date looking like a weird number, and I'll explain that in a second. We've got a cell here and I'm going to type a date in it. 2nd of the 9th 2017. If I hit enter, it recognizes that it's a date, but I could choose number here and it's given us a number 42,980. Now what that is might sound a little bit cryptic. It's the number of days since the 1st of the 1st 1900. So the 1st of the 1st 1900 is 1. If I turn that to a number, it'll come out as 1. And if I did something like that and converted it to a date, you can see that it's now the 5th of January. So that's what Excel's doing. And every day is 1, and that means that every hour is 1/24th, every minute is 1 over 1,440, and every second is 1 over 86,400. And so if you understand that, then working with dates and times is a little bit easier. And so we talked about ran between on the previous sheet, and because we've got a number, dates are just numbers, I put in the 1st of the 3rd 2010. I'll make that darker for you. And I wrote a ran between function that says give me a random date between this date and that date. And so here we have it. We've got a bunch of random dates and they're volatile still, so I'm going to copy, paste values, so they're no longer volatile. Because it's just a number, I can do formulas on it. Now we haven't necessarily covered these yet, but you might have tried these yourself. What is the minimum? Well, that's the earliest date. Because a date's a number, the maximum is obviously the most recent date. What's the range? Well, I could do that minus that. It's going to tell us that there's 2,544 days between those two dates. Could even do the average date and the median date as well. So I've been just selecting, but I talked before about how keyboard shortcuts can be used inside formulas. So I've just clicked on cell G7, keyboard shortcut Control-Shift down arrow, and you can see that that has selected down to G27. So that's pretty simple. Now I talked about paste special values before. Let's say I want to add a year to all of these dates. First thing I would do would be to just type 365 in any old cell, copy it, select all of these cells, paste special, and it opens up a special little box here, and you can choose a bunch of different options, and the one I'm going to choose is add. Bang. So when it does it, it changes it to numbers, but you can quickly change it to date back again, and we've simply got the dates that we had previously with an extra year added on. So 365 can now be deleted, and we've got our updated dates. So if you ever do have any problems, one thing I just did want to mention is that in Mac computers, in the earlier versions of Excel in particular, instead of 1 being the 1st of the 1st 1900, it was the 1st of the 1st 1904. I have no idea why that was, but if you ever worked with someone who was on a Mac and they sent you a file, sometimes your dates were 4 years out. So there is a setting inside the advanced options of Excel where you can preferentially select that. I don't think it happens with more modern versions, but if you do see it, gives you an opportunity to go and look for it. So, alright, date and time formats. All of these things here are numbers, but they could easily be dates as well. So I'm going to select all of them, and I'm going to put it on to time. And if you look at this, it makes no sense, because we've got that one there and that one there giving us the same time. What we see in the cell is a format. What we see up in the formula bar is actually what Excel is reading the value as. And so we can see in this first cell that it says 2nd of the 1st 1900, and we can see in this next one it says 5th of the 1st 1900. But the format of the cell tells us that they're the same, and that can be really deceiving. So you could choose a different number format. That would help. So you could do custom. We could do something like this one here, and that would include the date as well, and we could see that they are now different. But it's definitely worth understanding that if you do get some dates and times that don't look right, play around with some of these formats. There's lots of different custom formats, and you can always create your own custom formats as well by simply typing something at the top here. So if I wanted to, I could add on with a colon, seconds, and click OK, and that would update with those 2 extra, obviously unnecessary, but zeros on the end for seconds. So we've got some interesting options there if we want it. Format Painter allows us to copy that down, and we can see. So if you've got half a day, it's going to be 0.5. If you've got a quarter of a day, it's going to be 0.25. If you've got 3/4 of the day, 0.75. If I select all of them, change it to time, it's going to give us midday, 6 AM and 6 PM, hopefully. There we go. So when you are looking at Excel, and you'll see these two video links that I've added here, they'll do examples around things like timesheets and so on, and talk about how you can manipulate these times and make sure that you get what you want out of it. Now if I look at an example of rowing erg times, 519.5, and that sounds sensible, but if I click on the cell and I look up in the window, it says that it is 12:05:20 AM, and so it can be very, very confusing. But nevertheless, it is getting it. If you want to understand what the split time is, you can still do it, and it'll tell you that the split time was 1:19. I can drag that little square and pull it down, and it's going to give me split times. I spent about a year trying to break 7 minutes on the erg, and I did 6:47.5 finally, and I don't think I've done a 2K since, but that was about the split that I was trying to go on. And if you were trying to figure out how many seconds were in this, then you could work it out like so. $319.5 seconds. So having a little table that looks like this, that helps you understand these hours, minutes and seconds, can be very helpful if you're working with like this data here, some erg times. It might be information that's been spat out of the GPS system that shows the amount of minutes in a certain zone. It might not be in the right format. In fact, most of the time it won't be in the right format. So manipulating these dates and times using some of these lessons can be pretty useful. Watch these two videos and you'll get a bit more of a feel for things. Get on to names. Names is something I use all the time. You can name a cell, you can name a table, a range, a list. There's lots of reasons why it makes sense. One of the reasons I do it is that it really helps with formula writing, in particular lookup functions. So before I get on to lookup functions, I want to do a really simple example. In the States they use pounds, whereas everywhere else uses kgs, and this is the conversion. So if I wanted to, I could go up into the name box, click inside it, and write something like that, kg conversion. I can't have any spaces, so that's worth remembering, but I can write anything else almost that I like. So if I've got a couple of athletes, and they've lifted some pounds, and we want to do a conversion, I could do something like this. I can just start typing kg, and you can see that it pops up, and it's going to do that conversion to kilograms for us. And so having a constant in there, if you look up Excel videos, you'll find that the stuff that gets talked about is things like tax rate, or in engineering there's certain conversion factors that get used. So it's not so many examples for sports folks, but this is a good one. Pounds to kilograms. Miles to kilometers an hour might be another one. So that's one use of names. I named a value in a cell. This is something I use with every single project I make. I almost always have a control panel sheet where I've got lists of names, player details and so on. So here we are, here we've got a little table, name, date of birth, position. I'm going to click up in the box. I try and be organized with this stuff, and I almost always use a prefix such as table, or probably what's even better would be grid. I have it be a descriptive name that makes it really easy to understand. So grid athlete details. And now if I wanted to, if I was somewhere else in the spreadsheet, I could click on that and it would take me there. So let's name this little range. And so if I wanted to write a lookup, we'll be doing that shortly, it would look something like this. There's a formula called VLOOKUP. I want to look up Eric in our player details table. So I can start writing the name that I gave it, which was grid athlete details, and if I hit tab you can see it's selected for us. I want the date of birth, It's going to give us that funny format. I'll just change that to date. So we can see there that it's just doing that lookup for us, and if I change the athlete, it's going to do that lookup for us. So the table made that formula a lot easier to understand. Yo-yo test is one where you need a conversion to occur, so I would do something like this. Select it all, keyboard shortcut makes it easy. Let's use that same terminology. Grid, yo-yo conversion. When we're putting together our database, we could use that conversion automatically after someone enters a yo-yo test. One of the best applications, in my opinion, of names is as part of a project around building a strength training template. And I've done that in a few videos, and I've got them linked on the next sheet. There are a couple of videos here that talk about defined names as well, but let's just get started with how you might create a name range for this. I've called it lower body primary lifts, squats and deadlifts and things like that. I'm just going to start from squat, and I'm going to go down, and I'm going to call this, just like my name suggests. You can capitalize it and do the things that you like, but as long as you don't do spaces, it's going to work. So I've got lower body primary lifts. What if I decide that I've got a new exercise? Unfortunately, because I've created that name range and I specified the cells, it's not going to capture that. And so if I want to adjust it, formulas, there's a big button here called the name manager. There's our lower body primary lifts, and you can see that it's listed as L7 to L28. So I could simply type 29, or I could use the little finder. I'm going to go and select it. I'm going to select a few rows below it, so I've got some room to grow my list if I want to. It's now updated that, and if I do lower body primary lifts, you can see it's expanded out. The problem is that when you leave empty spaces on the bottom of your name range, it can cause you a few problems for drop-down lists. We'll adjust this in a minute when we get to the next tab. So what I've got here is secondary lifts. I'm just going to copy that to save myself a hassle. I'm going to select down a bit further, paste it in there. Now I've created two name ranges now. For the next exercise, I'm going to do a third name range, and that's our categories. Exercise categories. So inside the name manager, you can do cells like I did with that pounds to kilogram, lists like a list of names or a list of exercises, and grids, which is what I did for the yo-yo test and for the athlete details table. Didn't talk about formula, but you can actually write a formula inside the name manager that you could then apply to calculations as well. That's a little bit advanced. I don't want to cover that now. I'll get held up in that, but pretty cool to be able to create some of your own formula too. Data validation is where lists of names come to light. We'll have a look at that strength training stuff in a second, but let's just start with some basics. You can do data validation for lots of reasons, but ultimately what you want to do is make sure that you have clean data entered into your spreadsheet. So, for example, if we wanted these three boxes to be filled, click up on the data validation tab, and we can see there's a few options. List, we can click on the arrow, we can select all of the names that we want to appear in our list. Okay, that's now a drop down box. That's pretty easy. Problem is, this is ugly. This should be somewhere else, and it will be way better if we start it again. So I'm going to click on any value. Let's move this out the way. let's pretend this is on another sheet. We're going to select that. I'm going to call this list of data validation names. Now when I go to data validation, I can type an equals sign and simply type in that name I just created, or I can hit F3 on a PC. I don't think you can do this on a Mac yet, and I can just choose from a list which is right in front of me, list DV names. And so now I've got that appearing, and if I wanted to, I could add little messages. And if they do it wrong, we can give them a nice friendly message as well. And so we got that pop up, and we've also got our somewhat friendly reminder. I don't like those reminders, I tend not to turn them on, so I could just tick that box and it's gone. The other thing I could do is untick this, so we don't get that either. So the messages can be useful or they can be annoying. I'm going to just drag that across so we can see a bit more of the screen. Second type of data validation that I want to show you is that you can choose a date between the 1st of the 1st 2016, 1st of the 1st 2020. So you can specify that only dates in that range. See, that's alright. Whereas that's not. Because we didn't put a custom message in, it just gives you a default one. But it stops the incorrect date from being entered. Similarly, we could choose whole number or decimal. Let's say a whole number between 0 and 10. So that might be something you do for an athlete entering in workload data. RPE scale 0 to 10 or 1 to 10. You could choose decimal if you are assuming that they want to write 6.5 instead of 6 or 7. Talked a little bit about doing that exercise setup. First thing I want to show you is just the exercise tab. Data validation. We've done this once before. Excuse me. List. If I hit F3, I can see that we can choose lower body primary lifts. And I hit OK. Now what we'll see is that unfortunately it's defaulted to the bottom of the list. That's because we left those blank cells, and we'd have to scroll up each time if we wanted to choose front squat. Now I don't like that at all. I mucked around with this for a while myself and it was very frustrating. So if I go back to our names, go to the name manager, lower body primary lifts, and I click this button here. If I select the cell above, I can select down as far as I like below hand, tick the box. I'm going to do the other one while we're here. And because we've left an empty cell at the top, it's now going to default to the top of the list rather than the bottom of the list. And even though there's still blank cells at the bottom, which allows us to go and add any new exercises we might have come across, it's a lot cleaner and easy to use. Something I want to just show you is a real trick towards creating a strength training template. You might have 5 to 15 different exercise categories, and you don't want to have a really huge list. So if you select an exercise group first, then the second drop down box can only show what was in the first. So if I click data validation and list and hit F3, we can see that we have something called exercise categories. lower body primary lifts, lower body secondary lifts. Now in this data validation field, we've got it referencing a direct list, so we're going to have to change that. We have to type a formula. It's not too hard, but it's easy enough to get confused by this piece. So we're on the data validation tab. So we want to have it look at this cell to identify what list to open. So if we select something in cell M4, we want that list to open in N4. Now the real important thing is that whatever it says here must be the name of a list, and it must be spelled exactly the same way. If it's not, your connection is not going to work. So I've got lower body secondary lifts here, and you can see that that's what's showing. Seated calf raise, for example. Lower body primary lifts, we've got a different list, back squat, front squat. And so if you've got your template set up, you can be building your program with much more confidence because you've got less things to scroll through. Now on the right here, it's quite a brave title, the best strength and conditioning Excel template ever. It's not one of mine. It's a guy who does some pretty good work, and worth checking out some of his templates because you may get some good ideas, or you may even want to buy some of them yourself. But yeah, certainly a brave title. Number 48 is a video of mine, which is very simple, and it's a basic strength training grid that has 4 weeks, and you can do a few calculations in amongst it. And then there's a Excel is fun video that really goes through the ins and outs of data validation. Alright, let's keep rolling. Tables. Now tables are great. I didn't use them for a long time. If you've used SQL, you'll get the concept a bit better. Here we are, we've got a data set. I double click on it and I can see that it's down to row 1243, so it's reasonable size. I'm going to move this away. I want to have a clean row above the table and a clean column to the right of the table. If I click inside my data set, click on the insert tab, there's something called table, and it correctly guesses my data. That's because I left a blank cell. It automatically provides a little format. You can change that like so. There's themes and all sorts, and you need to give it a name. I believe that this is really important. I always call my tables TBL and then some descriptive name. I'm just going to call it load. The reason to do tables, there's many. If you're using pivot tables, it's probably a must do. If you've got an expanding data set and you want charts and formula to automatically roll down to the next row, then tables are a good one as well. So if I insert a column here, you can see that it has given it a name. That's because you can't have a column without a name when you use tables. So as long as you have a unique name, so I can't do soreness here because there's already soreness. It's going to change that automatically to soreness 2. I'm just going to call this to wellness, and I'm going to type equals sum and drag across soreness, fatigue and sleep. You can see both down in the window and up in the formula bar that it's applied these weird square brackets to these columns. That is it kind of looks like SQL, which is a programming language inside Microsoft, but it really is easy once you get used to it. As soon as I hit enter, it's going to copy this formula down 1200 rows all the way down automatically. And if I add a column to the right hand end, the table is going to expand to include this new column. You can see the format's wrapped around it. It's now part of the column. And so I want to do duration times RPE for my load, and you can see it just automatically fills that down. And so really easy to tidy up your data sets and make them work. Now that we've got a table, we've also got a context menu that isn't normally there. You can see it's called Table Tools, and there's a bunch of stuff that appeared when we created the table, so we could have changed our formats to whatever you like. There's the opportunity to do different stylings and so on. You can put total rows in there, and there's various things around resizing, removing duplicates, and so on. We'll cover slices when we look at pivot tables. Very, very helpful. The one thing that I did learn when I went to a Excel conference once was that if you've got really large data sets, like 5,000 rows plus, this table's not too bad. It's only got sort of 13 columns, but I've worked with 20,000 row tables with 200 columns, mainly around sort of GPS data. And the Excel table format, because it's applying all of these colors and borders and so on, actually makes your spreadsheet a bit slower. So sometimes it's not a good idea, but not many people will get up to 5,000 rows. So just a note to make. So we've got this table now, we've called it TBL load, and that's going to be helpful for our next tab, which is pivot tables. I've put some videos up here. Number 88 is one of the ones I'm more proud of. It's really about making sure that when you are setting up a table that you have lots of descriptive information. Here we've got date, week, athlete, position, training type, attendance type, and then a bunch of number values. So all of those different descriptive columns, there's 6 of them here, are really helpful when you're doing things like analysis projects. There are a bunch of other videos from other people that would be worth your while as well. There's nothing on the pivot table. We're going to use the table from the previous sheet, but just wanted to start with blank. We could click on this button here, Summarize with Pivot Table, or we could click on Insert Pivot Table. Where do we want it? An existing worksheet on the pivot table tab, and I'm going to click up high here and like K2 because we've got a little bit of text here on the left. Now we've got this wizard here that's docked on the side, and if I hover over it and I've got the 4-way arrow, that means I can drag it out. This is where the pivot table is going to start building, and if I expand this out a bit, you can see what I mean over here when it says drag and drop your 4 quadrants. So what do we want to do? We've got filter, we've got column headings, we've got row headings, and we've got values. So let's try something out. Let's try and put athlete into rows. You can see it already starts building the table. Let's pull fatigue into values. I'm just going to stop that. As soon as I click outside of the pivot table, that wizard disappears. When I click back into the pivot table, it appears again. If I right click, I can choose value field settings. I can rename what I've called this. I could do average. I could change the number format and click OK. And we've now got the average fatigue score for each athlete. If I wanted to, I could put position into filters. At the moment, everything's showing, but I could say, show me just the front rowers. And we're going to have less athletes viewable, locks and loose forwards, or a multiple selection, front row and locks loose forwards. So there we go, pivot tables, very easy to play with. That was a simple example. If I wanted to, I could drag an extra field on. Or another field on it as well. It tries to guess what kind of analysis you want. So it's not consistent all the time. We've got count of sleep and sum of load. So I can just go into those value field settings and once again go average. You can see the format's not good, so I'm going to do value field settings again, number format, 1 decimal place, and that's now a lot better. I can even edit that heading without it causing me any problems. Instead of this filter up here, I'm going to drag that away. I'm going to do something called a slicer. Insert slicer by position. Now the slicer appears. I'm just going to put it here for now. A bit like the table, it's got its own little theme menu. I can make that however I like it, and there's some other options. I like darker ones personally. And I can clear it to show everything. I can hold my control button down and select what I want. So slices are great. In Excel for Mac, they haven't existed up until 2016 version. So if you're using Excel for Mac 2011, there are good reasons to upgrade. Slices is one of them. Certainly, one of the cool things about doing pivot tables is being able to really quickly interact with your data. So if I just give you an example here, if I take out fatigue just by dragging it out of that grid, I've now just got training load. I'm going to put athlete up into the filter, and I'm going to put week down into the rows. So we've now got training load showing. And something that is immensely frustrating is that week 10 is after week 1. That's because alphabetical, but interestingly enough, I can just drag that to the bottom. And if I just choose one athlete, Andy Jones, we can see we've got, I'm going to delete that slicer, we can see we've got his training load by week. And the context menu has got two parts to it. One of them is called pivot charts. Now pivot charts I don't believe is available in Macs yet, but it's on the way as far as I understand. I'm going to right click and just get rid of all these buttons. Now I'm inside my pivot table again. I'm going to insert a slicer by athlete. Not sure how big this will be, but see if we can fit it in. I can put 2 columns to my slicer. There we go. So I can click on a player now. In the space of a few minutes, I can see a training load score. Now if I copy this and I paste it on the other side of the chart, on the design tab, on the analyze tab, I'll bring the field list back up. I'm going to take load out and I'm going to put wellness in. Just quickly change that to average with a number format. And if I insert a pivot chart, let's try a line this time. Make it quickly the same size as the other one. I just do this by default. I just hide all of these field buttons. I find them a little bit annoying. Quick little label. Now what we can see already is that the slicer is controlling both of those charts. That happened because I copied the first pivot table and reformatted it to show wellness. If I didn't, I could right click here and do report connections and choose which pivot tables it connects to. But pretty cool to be able to do stuff like that so easily. The next 2 tabs, formula and charts, are the primary reason that people use Excel. You can create formulas of all kinds to solve all sorts of problems, and you can do a wide variety of charting in Excel as well. So let's look at formulas first. And formulas are an important part of Excel, so much so that there is a formulas tab which we're on right now, and you can see that there is on the left a whole bunch of buttons that are really categories of formula. I'm going to look at 2 primary categories in this little video, and that is lookup and analysis formula. So if I click on this lookup button, you can see that there's a few things in there. We're not going to look at all of them, but a few of them. And there are some analysis formula which I think are most useful for people working in sports science. We've got a little data set here. It's not big, but it'll give us enough to play with. Before we get started, I want to do a very simple formula tutorial. And I'm going to do it right here on the left because it makes it easy to see the formula tip. If I type equals, Excel knows that I'm about to write a formula or reference a cell. Let's use VLOOKUP as an example. If I type VL, there's no other formula with that name, and so I can just hit the tab button and it takes me inside brackets to the first variable. Now this tooltip here, and I can move it around if I like. As long as I get the 4 crosshair arrows, I can move that around. So we can see it here. What is our lookup value? Let's say this is our lookup value. I hit a comma, and you can see that the formula tip moves to the next part of the formula. I want to look up Byron Shanks in this table and extract out something from, let's make it column 3, and do an exact lookup. So when this last option appears, I could double click on it. I could type a 0, trues and falses are 1s and 0s in Excel, close brackets and hit enter. And what that lookup is telling us is that Byron is a lock/loose forward. By clicking into the formula bar or typing F2, we can see the different parts of the formula. We can see that this table from E2 to O24 has been highlighted in a red box, and in the formula itself it is red text. And similarly, the lookup target E24 is highlighted blue. It happens to be in the red box as well, so it's not quite as obvious. But those boxes are very helpful, and you can actually move them around if you wanted to. So I could move this or resize that box with the formula in edit mode. The easiest way to get started with formula is to do a few practice goes. So I'm just going to scroll down a little bit. So we're looking at VLOOKUP. I quickly rushed through an example just then. Now I'm going to write a VLOOKUP formula that finds the duration for Mike Potter. What do I want to VLOOKUP? Mike Potter. Why is VLOOKUP useful? Well, it's useful if you have an organized table of data where the lookup target is in the first column. That's really important. So all of our names are in column 1. Now I've put a little red 1 up the top because that'll help us figure out a VLOOKUP. I can select my table. If I was going to copy this formula somewhere, I'd hit F4, and it's really good practice to do that all the time. Where is duration? Duration is column 9. You can see the red 9 up the top. Do I want an exact match? Yes, I do. There are times when you might do an approximate match, but I'm not going to cover that. That is for examples of when you might be giving a grade to an athlete. So if they score between this score and that score, give them a grade 3. That might be where you do a true VLOOKUP, but this time I'm doing an exact match. And it's going to tell us that Mike Potter is 80 minutes. And we can just quickly have a look at that, and we can see that that's true. If I change that to 75, we note that this formula is live and is going to work. If I drag this down, let's click inside the formula and see what's going on. It's asking us to find the RPE. Well, in this case, the athlete didn't train, so it's coming up as a 0. So why don't I choose a different athlete? Or I could put an RPE in there. Different athlete would be better. Let's put in Andy Jones. Because it's still looking in column 9, it's giving us the wrong value here. We want to know RPE, which is column 10, so I just need to edit that third parameter of the VLOOKUP. So a VLOOKUP requires you to have the target be in the first column, and you need to know the column headings so that you can tell VLOOKUP that it needs to look in the 8th column, the 9th column, the 2nd column, or whatever else you want to arrange. That's where the match function can be useful. The match function tells us whereabouts is the target we're looking for. And so in the case of Scott, we can find out that Scott is in the 14th row of the table, for example. And that's what this first formula is going to do. Where is Dave Black? I'll type that in there. Equals match. We can see returns the relative position of an item. Where's our lookup value? There it is. Where's our array of data? There it is there. We want an exact match, so I can double click that, close brackets, and I'm done. It's going to tell us that Dave is the 6th item in the list. Let's make this dynamic. We've tried this before in a previous tab, but let's put it data validation on this. Data validation. We want a list, and we want to look at these names. So now I can just choose. Let's see if we can find out what column Saunus is in. Match will also do that really easily for us. We're looking for Saunus in the top row of the table, and it's going to tell us that Saunus is the 6th column. And the reason I showed you that is because that can then feed into the VLOOKUP, or what I'll show you shortly, an index and match. So if we wanted to set up something dynamic, so we've got Nate Christensen selected, we could be choosing anyone. And we could also have this be a data validation box. So let's do so. Data validation, list, okay. So as we choose different options, you can see that that column changes. So if I just do an extra formula here, we want a VLOOKUP. Whoever's been selected here in this table, and our column index number is going to be this. Don't need to, but I'm going to F4 that as well. Do we want it to be an exact match? You bet we do. So we can see that Wayne's sleep is 5. We can see that Wayne's fatigue is 8. Andy's fatigue is 9, and so on. So we've got a nice little dynamic lookup. And that's what you do with index and match. When I was explaining this to a colleague once, he nodded and said, oh, it's a bit like playing Battleships. Battleships is a little board game where you have to just guess coordinates of a battleship and you get a hit or a miss. And so to play that game well, you can use a little strategy where you try and imagine a grid over the ocean. You've got to pick whereabouts things are. So you're doing x-axis and y-axis guess. So that's what index and match allows us to do. And so let's copy our name drop down box. You can see the data validation list came with it. Let's also copy our Saunus, and that can come with it as well. First of all though, I'm just going to do a basic index for you. When we open it up, it does things in a different order. So we need to select our array like that. We want to look up something in the 4th row in the 5th column. And so it's not telling us anything particularly sensible at the moment. It's just pulling out something random from this table. based upon manually entered row and column coordinates. So I'm going to delete that. Let's do it better. We're going to look in this array and we're going to find out what row based upon a match function, and we're going to find out what column based upon a second match function. And so that index function is now fully dynamic and gives us the answer that we want regardless of what gets chosen in the two selection boxes there, name and measure, just like we did in that VLOOKUP second example. The reason why index is probably a better option is that we don't need to be looking at the first column as one of our search criteria. We could be looking at the first outside back or the person with the highest training load as our index match option. So the other significant thing about using index is you can find multiple instances of the same athlete. So we can see that Andy Jones is in this table twice, and so is Byron Shanks. There's two different dates, everyone else is just in there once. And so if we wanted to find and extract both of those options, the index function can do that for us. We could either combine that with an if equation or use something called aggregate. I'm not going to do that now. I've done quite a few tutorials on that. You can see them up there. Video number 100 is probably a really good place to start. But if you have a data set of 10,000 and each athlete has 100 records in that across a couple of years worth of fitness testing, for example, the index function combined with aggregate can pull out all of those, or the most recent 10, or the best 5, or things like that. So index is a contributor to all of that. If I go down to the analysis formula, this allows us to do things such as find out how many, how much, what's the average, what's the sum. And that's obviously an important part of your day-to-day life. The first thing I want to do is to count how many missed sessions there were. And so you can see in column I there, attendance, we have put missed training, and it's just once for now. So let's see if our formula finds that out. So analysis formula allow you to do criteria-based calculations. And so that could be count in this case, or it could be average sum and some more complicated things. So what is our range? Our range is this. And what is our criteria? I'm just going to manually type that in for now. But we can see that that count works out fine. And if I drag this down, it won't make sense in the data set because there's data there for them, but you can see it updated too. What about if I want to know the average duration for front rowers? Well, I can do that. Average isn't actually going to help me because I want criteria. So let's backspace it a bit. We can see there's other average options. We've got a single criteria, so we can do average if. We can do it for double criteria, triple, however many criteria we want, using average ifs. But let's just go for average if now. The formula tells us that it wants to know where is our criteria. Well, our criteria is position. So, what is our range? What is our criteria? It is front row with a space between it. And once we've decided our front row, what's the duration average? Everyone looks like they're on 80 with a few exceptions, so let's see what happens. So we've got an average duration of 60. Let's find a front rower. Top row is easy, and change it to 500 and see what that does to our duration. You can see it goes up to 135. So that formula is live. Just revert that back to 80. Let's find the sum of load for Andy Jones. So let's have a look at that. We want to do sum if. Because we're looking by person this time, we have to use that as our criteria. That is our criteria column. Andy Jones is who we're looking to find information out about, and we're looking at training load. So select that down there, and there we go, 590, and we can eyeball that. We've got 270 plus 320, and my math tells me that that's 590. Can I also look down at the bottom right hand corner of the window? We can see that there's some quick options there: average, count and sum. And just as an aside, you can right click and add more stuff in there by, for example, ticking that maximum and minimum. You can see there'll be a few more things present themselves. So sometimes just selecting is a good way to validate your calculations. Now this is a bit more complicated. I'm going to use a formula called aggregate here. We want the highest training load for inside backs. So aggregate allows us to do a range of formula. And if we drag down, there's one called large. There's also something called max at the top, but don't use that because it doesn't allow you to do criteria. So we want large. We want to ignore errors, and we are looking for training load. I'll lock that, but we want to divide it by a criteria. Criteria we want is that position must equal inside backs. So that's our criteria. Now we have to tell it, do we want the highest, the second highest, or the third highest? Well, we want the highest, so that is a 1. So it's telling us 640 is the highest training load for inside backs. And we can check that out if we wanted to by looking up here at Kelvin Wood. Now I've got a couple of notes up here. One is called a nested formula. Now a nested formula is an example of what we did here under index. We've got an index function, but it's got a match formula inside it. So that's called nesting. Nesting one formula inside another one. An array formula is something more complicated. I just used aggregate to find out the highest training load for inside backs. I could have also used a array formula. So let's have a look at that. I want to do the max of a data set as long as a condition is met. And so if that equals inside backs, then do the max of this. Otherwise, do nothing. And if I hit enter, it's not going to give us any value. But if I hit Control Shift and enter, it will give us a value. And what it will do is give us the same value as we calculated previously with aggregate. But if you look in the formula bar, you'll see something different. There's a curly brackets before the equals and after the last bracket. Now I didn't type that in, Excel put that in when I typed Control Shift and then enter. That's an array formula. You shouldn't use them very often because they slow your files down a bit, but they can be very useful sometimes. Now if we go inside any of these, let's choose the aggregate one because there's a bit going on. I'm outside the bracket, so nothing's really happening, although the coloured boxes are showing. If I'm inside the function, we can see the formula tip appears. Now if I click on the array piece, you can see that that part of the formula gets selected in the formula window. If I hit F9, it evaluates just that piece and you can see everything that's not relating to inside backs shows up as a div 0 error. Everything that is relating to inside backs shows up as a number, 640, 400, 240, and so on. Really good way to find out if your formulas are working. Sometimes if you've got lots of bits going on, it can be hard to know what the problem is, but stepping inside the formula is great. So Control Z takes us back to a normal working formula, and I can just hit enter. Let's have a look at charts. I can't cover too much, but I've got 3 really simple data sets. First data set here, I've got a bunch of athletes, 11 athletes. And we've got a bunch of variables. I'm just going to pick load, click on insert, and you can see this whole chart area. There's a button called recommended chart, so let's check that out first. And you can see it's pushing us in certain directions. Column chart, bar chart, a couple of line charts, and different things underneath that. Let's try the clustered column. I think that's probably the best option. It draws it. Now, what we need to do is go and edit this chart to make it look how we want. Now I've got chart junk down here. Chart junk is stuff on a chart which distracts you from the message and isn't worth having on there. An example of chart junk is too much color. I'm going to grab these grid lines and I'm going to make them as lightly shaded as possible. I'm going to right click on these bars, choose Format Data Series. I'm going to change that gap width to 100% and we'll see those bars get a bit fatter. I'm going to right click and choose Select Data so I can add some axis labels, like so. Also going to right click and add data labels. Now a good argument is that if I do that, I don't need this axis at all. I think that depends sometimes. You might like to keep that axis, maybe have less increments in it, maybe only 2 or 3 increments, but data labels are a great way to draw attention. You can see that to fit this in, Excel had to have these names be on an angle, and so that's why one of the recommended charts was a bar chart. So I could try a bar chart by looking at change chart type, and I could pick anything I liked or go back to recommended charts and say OK. And so what that does is allows those labels to be a bit easier to read. So you can argue one way or the other all you like, but it's easy to pick and choose which way you want to chart your data. You can change the colors, lighten up the grid lines, put a title on it. The way you do that is using the context menu. And the context menu is visible when a chart is selected. You can see there's design and format. Let's click on them both. If you click on format, there's a bunch of sort of prettying up options. If you click on design, you can see that there's some style options. Now I would see some of this stuff as chart junk. Too much color, too much shading, and especially if you're printing this kind of thing out, it's a disaster. So I tend to not want any of those options. Tend to prefer just a really simple one, although I do think that the bars could be thicker. So I'm just going to go back and reformat that, maybe to make it 50 and see what it looks like. While I'm there, I'm going to adjust the fill to a lighter blue. So anyway, we've got that now. You can see those labels are inside the end of the bar now, so that tidies it up a bit further. And that chart, you could argue, is good. I'm going to change the chart type back to a column and add a second series. So I just made it a bit fatter. If I select data, we've got load, so why don't I add something else? I want to add duration, and this is my data. And so that's added a second series on there. It's quite small compared to the first series, and because there's now two series, the auto title disappeared. So if I wanted to add a title, I would need to go and add that in myself using add chart element. And I can just click in here and give it a title or connect it to a cell. So I'm just going to do something really descriptive and simple, duration. If I drag that to the side, let's have a look at another one. This is a bunch of data for one athlete for a few days. So this is a good candidate because it's a time series for a line chart. So I'm going to select, actually start above that, load, insert, click on the line and choose line chart. Let's make it a bit bigger. Right click on it, select data so we can connect up our axis values, which are dates. Now I can modify that. Because it's dates, Excel recognizes that. If I change that to text, it'll only show me the values for days that have data. And you can see there's missing days in there. For example, there's no data on the 6th or 7th, and by changing it to a text axis, it skips those days. So load is now a line. I'm not going to dress this chart up too much, but I would certainly recommend doing the same thing as I did before. Lighten up grid lines, get a nice descriptive title, remove as much chart junk as possible. If you get a whole lot of dates, you can probably format those dates a bit better using the assumption that people know what year it is, and you can just go day and month. Therefore, when you get more chart values, they'll fit in before they start to change orientation on you. Once again, I'm going to drag that to the side. Last chart I want to have a look at combines a couple of things that we've done already. We're going to do some data validation. We will have a list of just these three names. Let's pick one just to get started. Then we're going to do a VLOOKUP. VLOOKUP this in this range, and we want column 2 with an exact match. If I drag that across, quick edit, that column needs to be incrementally increased so that it matches up to Dwayne. If we click on any one of them, we can see that we're getting the right values in. Let's change it, and we can see it all update. So this allows us to now have a nice dynamic chart. We have to tidy this chart up, particularly by having labels on it. We can make them a bit fatter. There's a whole range of things we could do. Add data labels. Because we're doing those data labels, we could certainly have much less of a dominant grid line set. They're not too dark, so I'll leave them as they are. Could have a dynamic title as well, so we haven't covered this, but why not we give it a go. And so what this formula is doing is it's writing the text weekly training load 4, and then it's adding whatever name is selected in cell E33. And our title, using the formula bar, can just connect to that cell. And if I put this little cell up here and I put the chart next to it, you can just pick your athlete and our chart is going to update and be all dynamic. And so we saw this with our pivot charts with a slicer. This is also pretty cool. A dynamic chart that shows us for the selected athlete what the weekly training load was. Now we could add 2 or 3 other charts, turn it into a little dashboard with RPE or sessions missed or things like that in there as well. And I've talked about that in a couple of projects, particularly number 96 up the top. Now the last tab I want to go through, there's no tricks in this one, just some advice. I do a lot of stuff in Excel. I write projects for all sorts of people for different reasons, and I'm constantly going and looking up beat test scores, yo-yo scores, set rep intensity calculators. I'm looking for random data sets for 1RM lifts, training load, and so on. So this sheet here is my go-to sheet. I've got a whole file full of lists of strength exercises, stretches, all in the same place. And I have it as a shortcut up in my toolbar. You can't see it here because I use a different computer for my day-to-day work. But I have a toolbar that has a button that launches my GoTo file, and that GoTo file has all of these reference tables in there, and you'll find you use them over and over again. And one thing I used to do, I don't do so much now because I've become a little bit better, but is when I had figured out a formula or a chart that was a bit tricky, I would save it in a place that I could go and check it out. So I could go to this sheet called formula and I could find out how to do a VLOOKUP. At the beginning, it was quite hard work doing a proper VLOOKUP and having it work. So I would have this GoTo file where I'd have 2 or 3 examples of VLOOKUP, so I could just copy them. Even if it was 6 months since I had a look, I could go in there, check it out, remind myself, and make it happen. And over time, I stopped looking at those because I was sorted. But now my GoTo file mainly has reference data sets, little logos, and a few things that I use over and over again. Alright, we've got to the end. 10 Excel tips and tricks. They're all hyperlinked, so you can click to any of them and you can go and see the detail. Thanks for sticking it out, and drop me a line referencing this file number 102 if you want a copy of this file.